Alright, so check this out. Here's a little background. My father was in the Army for 21 years, retired, and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with the stocking of the coolers or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or cigarettes. This all took place in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember the date well because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit, and my dad would let me drive him to and from work just to get some practice on the road, both at day and at night. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table that was set up along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books, getting up to run the register, and stocking the cooler at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual. When I did, I saw a lady that was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right on I-75, by the way. Now this in itself was really strange because of where we were located. You didn't get many people just walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere and was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck. But I was completely wrong. She came into the store. She looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting just a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walks up to the counter and starts telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride up to the next big town just north from us, which was Ocala, by the way, and this is important. My dad lets her know that he's working and there's no way that he can take her. That's when she turns and looks at me. And while she's looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and subtly shakes his head, no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns back to my dad and points at me, asking if I can take her. My dad responded that I only had her learner's permit and I wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back alone. Now, between me and you, normally, I would have done it, even though it was illegal, because I'd done it a few times before already. Plus, I just liked the practice of driving. But I didn't argue with my dad, since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally a very chatty person with the customers, but for whatever reason, he was almost curt and dismissive with this lady. It turns out he had a bad vibe about her from the minute that he had seen her walking up the drive. Well, after being told no, she cusses him out for a minute, and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slams the door, and I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she did, and then she stalks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her as she does this, and I continue to watch as she makes her way back up to the interstate and then starts heading up the northbound on-ramp. About a year passes. I'm in my bedroom, less than a week before my 16th birthday. I hear my dad yelling from the living room. He says, "Hey, get your butt down here and look at this." I quickly run to the living room and I see my dad pointing at the TV, and then we see a mugshot of the lady up on the screen, and I immediately remember the lady who had been in the store. It turns out, I almost gave a car ride to Eileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer and then later put to death. Netflix would make documentaries about this lady, calling her the hooker from hell and the queen of the serial killers. I still have nightmares about what could have happened. Somebody in the comments asks, why was Ocala so important? You mentioned it in your story, but it never resolved. And the OP responds with, right. Ocala was just one of the many places that she killed someone at shortly after this gas station incident. Another commenter chimes in. They say, my son's father did give her a ride in the early 90s. He didn't realize it until a few years later when he saw her on the news, but he was driving on I-94 all the way up in Detroit, and she was hitchhiking. He let her in his car, and she eyeballed him up and down real creepy as he drove. She asked if he was looking, quote, for a good time, and he declined. So she asked to be dropped off at the next exit, which he did. And when he told me this, I doubted his story since she spent most of her time in Florida while we were from the Detroit area. But after doing a bit of research and checking the timeline, she was in Michigan the same time that he picked her up. She grew up in Michigan, actually. He would later go on to say that he never forgot those bugged-out eyes and that face, and knew immediately that it was her as soon as he saw her mugshot on the TV. Somebody responds to that with, I saw a crime documentary once, and apparently a few guys who declined to, quote, have a good time with her were left unharmed after giving her a lift. I work at a gas station on a main route. We see a lot of travelers passing through. Only one person works each shift, and it's a 24-hour store. When this happened, we were short-staffed, so I agreed to an overnight. I'm female, and I work in a state that's always had self-serve gas stations. So, this guy comes in. I asked him if he needed any help. He says no. He's getting gas at the pump, but needs to use the bathroom. I go back to work on whatever invoices that we got yesterday. The guy uses the bathroom while I do this, and then he goes back outside. About 5 to 7 minutes later, he comes back inside, and he tells me that he's confused about the pump. He directly says, "You might have to come outside and help me." Customers don't often say this. They usually just complain that it's not working, so I'm already feeling weird about this guy. I shake it off because he looks like a nerd, and I don't feel afraid of him in the moment. I look at the register to see what error it came up with for his pump, and there are no errors. The register doesn't even say that it was in use. Even if someone tries to pay and nothing's wrong with their payment, it'll at least say payment/loyalty timed out. But literally, it had no sign of him even trying to use it before asking me for help inside. I ask him if he just wants to prepay with me inside, and he agrees. He goes back out to his car, grabs his wallet and brings it back in, and he slides me $10. I give him his receipt and he says, "Can you help me? I don't understand the machine." And I say, we really aren't allowed to leave the store during overnight shifts because it's just me here and it's not safe to go outside. And for the record, I don't know why I told him I was alone, but again, he didn't seem like a threat. He proceeds to say, "I don't understand what it's asking me. I need help. I'm not scary." I tell him again that I can't go outside because it's a store policy for the overnight shift and say, "It's not that you're scary, I just can't go outside." Even if a little old lady was asking for help at the same hour, I'd have to tell her the same thing. Which is true. We can't even take out the trash during overnights. He starts to walk away from the counter now, but again stops at the door and asks me one last time to come outside and help him. I'm pretty annoyed at this point. I've said no twice now. I'm not going, so I just wish he'd stop asking. I finally respond, and I say in a super annoyed tone, "Okay, all you need to do is 1, pick up the nozzle, 2, select the fuel that you want, and 3, put it in your tank and squeeze the handle. I'm not going outside. Then he finally goes back to the car and the register tells me that he had no trouble pumping the gas. Also, I got a look at his plates and they're local. As far as I know, the only 2 states in the country that actually force the employees to go out and pump the gas for the customer are Oregon and New Jersey, and we are not in either one of those states. So if this dude really did register his car here in this state, he's definitely pumped his own gas before, and I don't know what he was trying to do with me. This kind of thing wouldn't normally make me suspicious, but the fact that he originally opted for me to go outside instead of just bringing me money inside, at 3 in the morning no less, is weird. Along with how he didn't even bother to try to use the pump before he came in to ask me for help, claiming that it wasn't working and him not taking my first 2 no's for an answer. All I can say is, I'm glad that I trusted my gut and the store policy and stayed inside. His windows were tinted pretty dark and I couldn't see what was inside the car. I worry that he might have had 1 or 2 other people in there to make sure I didn't run away once I came out. Somebody in the comments responds, "You weren't afraid because he looked nerdy?" And then asks, "Have you ever Googled pictures of serial killers? Most of them look like giant dorks." I used to work at a small neighborhood gas station. I was working an opening shift at 6 a.m. with my best friend / coworker. We were doing our normal opening stuff as the sun came up. I went to get some ice from the back. For reference, the gas station building used to have a drive-through, so we have that kind of window in the back. I glanced at the back window and I realized there was a literal bloody handprint on the window. I looked closer and there were smudges of blood around the window handle that looked like somebody was definitely attempting to slide it open. We were really freaked out, so we went to look around other potential entrances around the building. I looked at the window in front and I noticed more dried blood on the hole where we take money for gas from outside, like someone was trying to stick their hand in to get something inside. I keep looking around and there's also dried blood on the front door handles, plus some splatters on the glass, like someone was pounding on the glass. My friend and I were both freaking out at this point. So, luckily, I had access to the security cameras and I checked them for any motion detected during the night. At 5 a.m., just an hour before, there was a motion capture and we watched as a man with his arms covered in blood walked around the store trying to get in. The freakiest thing was usually the store is open at 5 a.m., but this happened on a Sunday and we opened at 6 a.m. that day. Really dodged a bullet there. There were police lights in the distance on the cameras, so we called the sheriff. He showed up pretty quick. He watched the security footage and confirmed that it was a guy that they had just picked up a little after 5:30. It's the craziest thing that's happened to me in my 3.5 years of working at gas stations. Somebody left a comment under this story saying, "This is definitely a crazy thing to encounter, that's for sure." And then they ask, did the sheriff say anything further about the guy that they picked up? Did they arrest him for something, or did he really just need help? And the OP responds with, well, he had something in his system, medication, probably way too much of it, and it turns out all of those injuries were self-inflicted and he was just looking for help. The sheriff that picked him up took him to the hospital and he lived. This story isn't as dramatic as the other ones on this subreddit, but it was incredibly terrifying for me to experience. It happened to me yesterday, late in the afternoon. I had just finished buying some snacks from the gas station when a man approached me as I was walking home. It was dark out, so the only thing that I could make out was that he was about 2 inches taller than me. He had on a green jacket with a hood on and had fair skin. He asks me what's in my backpack. I try walking away. That's not a word. I try walking away, but he grabs my bag and refuses to let me go. He demands that I hand him the bag. I tried my best to plead with him, saying that he could have the food inside if he was hungry, but he didn't care. He just kept fighting me for the bag. I did my best holding my ground and putting up a fight, and several drivers sped past me, and none of them even bothered to stop and help me. I was all alone on a dark and empty sidewalk. The gas station was in a pretty unsafe part of town. There's a bunch of drug addicts and violent people that hang around there. I used to live there, so I knew that the cops were regularly called into that neighborhood. I'm glad I managed to escape that environment 2 years ago. Eventually, the man removes his other hand, the one that's not holding the bag and pulling me, out of his pocket. And then I start fearing for the worst. I almost expected him to pull out a knife, but thankfully, it was only his fist. He begins banging his fist against my fist, both holding on to the bag, to the point where my skin cracks and I start to bleed. I couldn't take it anymore, so I finally let go of the bag, and then I watched him run off. The funny part is, there was only chips and juice in there. Not like there was anything super valuable. I walked the rest of the way home, constantly looking over my shoulder in case that bastard came back for more. Maybe he would be upset that there was nothing valuable in the bag, and then he would come back to do something worse to me. I didn't call the police because I knew nothing would be done about it. I barely even had a description of the guy, so they wouldn't really have anything to go off of. I'm currently at work right now writing this with a bandaged hand, trying my best to get through the day despite the pain. I hope the guy who did all this ends up messing with the wrong person and gets the hell beaten out of him. I wish I never went to that neighborhood. I wish I'd just stayed home. I haven't shared this story with many people, but I'm a 23-year-old female, and I worked at a gas station for just over 3 years a little bit ago. At the time of this story, I would have been no older than 18. I lived in a heavily suburban area in the deep south that wasn't witness to anything too insane, so many businesses didn't take many safety precautions beyond what our training instructed us on. Things like, don't fight the robber, give them what they want, comply. My manager, Sophia, never scheduled women for overnight shifts. It was always our male staff who had to do those. However, I had offered one night to stay later for the extra bit of money, and seeing as I lived a whole 5-minute walk away, I didn't see any harm in staying later. One thing that I feel I need to mention is that it gets incredibly dark in the south at night, and the sun sets quickly. My area also had little to no streetlights. So, my shift started as normal. I manned the register, I swept, I restocked what I could, and I kept things tidy for the most part. But a girl can only mop so many times before there's nothing left to do. So I spent a lot of my time at the register, waiting for customers, and just screwing around on my phone to pass the time until a customer comes in. One finally does. I call out my standard greeting as I look up to find a tall, disheveled man standing at my register. Obviously, I immediately disregard my phone to help him out, but I notice he's acting odd. At the time, I had chalked it up to my imagination, but my gut told me otherwise. He asks where the restroom was, and I point him in the direction. Now, to get to the bathroom, you have to walk past the registers and into a small hallway where our office and stockroom also was. He makes his way there, and I continue on as normal, completely forgetting about him. Shortly after, a regular of mine walks in. He's a taller man who served in the Marines for 22 years, and we get to talking when I hear something fall over in the back, like a broom or mop or something. My regular asks me if I'm working alone and if I want him to take a look around. I decline the offer though, because I didn't want to get in trouble with my boss for letting a customer into the employee-only areas. So he says his goodbyes and lets me know that he'll be back later for some lottery tickets. More time eventually passes, and I have to pee after drinking endless Powerade from the soda machine. I go to make my way back, and before I could even reach the bathroom, I glance to the office and I notice the door is way more open than I had left it. I don't know what compelled me to push the door with my foot, but that's what I did. I kicked the door so that it would swing open and trigger the motion sensor light. The light beams on, and I don't see anything until I spot the odd bathroom guy stood stock still behind the door. We made eye contact as I immediately backed up out of the hole, and the man emerges from the office only seconds later and just casually strolls out, keeping his eyes locked on me the entire way until I couldn't see him anymore. I called my boss immediately to tell her, and then she called the police. Apparently, that man had been banned from every single other store in the area for doing the same thing, but he never faced any charges as he hadn't, quote, committed a crime yet. He continued to show up every day at random hours to just stare at me over the aisles without ever buying anything. I'm not sure what his intentions were or why he hid, but something about the way he stood so still long enough for the motion lights to turn off doesn't sit well with me. Somebody in the comments chimes in. They say, "It's like he enjoys knowing that he's causing fear. Sounds like he's testing the waters, observing and just seeing how the situation plays out." And the OP responds with, "I never thought about it like that. I only just remembered the incident from a video that I had just scrolled past on TikTok." I'm sorry in advance for my shit-ass writing. I'm horrible at writing stories, but some crazy stuff went down, so I have to share. A few nights ago, I received a call from a buddy of mine asking if I can give him a ride to an event, and then pick him up an hour or so later. I didn't have much to do that night, and he offered me $40, so I obliged. Around 8 p.m., my friend and I were in the car and on the way to said event. That night, it was pouring rain, and there was a ton of traffic because of the event, so I had to pay extra close attention to the road. About 8:30, we pull up to the place, my buddy gets out, and I drive on. Now, the place I took him was about 30 minutes away from my house, so it made more sense to stay in the area rather than driving all the way back home for 30 minutes and then driving all the way back. So, I chilled out, I turned on some music, and I started driving around, looking for a less chaotic place to park my car and just zone out. I was in a brand new luxury car, which had a sweet sound system with Bluetooth that I could hook up to. I didn't want to wreck trying to connect it, so I pulled off into a vacant gas station so I could get everything hooked up. This is where I went wrong, because not only had I entered a vacant lot at night, but I was in a bad part of town, and I was all by myself. Being oblivious, as I sometimes am, I didn't realize the dangerous situation that I was putting myself in. So, la-di-da, I'm sitting there, connecting the Bluetooth, when, for whatever reason, I get this urge to just look up. As I do, I see an old white BMW pull into the parking lot rather quickly and then stop in the middle of the lot directly in front of me. I notice there's 2 males and 1 female in the car. My guard is now up, but I wait to see what they do. Then, all of a sudden, one of the dudes in the passenger seat flings his door open, and I'm not kidding, starts running at my car like sprinting full speed. Oh crap, I think to myself. The look this man gave me was downright horrifying. I can only explain it as a look you would give someone that you have 100% intent to kill. My heart dropped, and so did my foot, onto the gas pedal. I pulled out of the parking lot and into the far lane of the street. I glanced back as quickly and as safely as I could, and I saw the dude and now the female as well were now both running towards my car in the middle of the road. There was a red light coming up. I had to make a choice. Do I follow the law and stop at the red light while these 2 lunatics in the bad part of town are sprinting at me at full speed at night while it's raining? Or do I value my safety? Pretty easy choice. I blast through that red light and I get the hell out of there. I'm weaving through back roads, I'm running more red lights, and finally I make my way to the highway. I'm pretty sure this group saw me sitting all alone in the gas station parking lot in a $100,000 car and saw me as an easy carjacking. Thank God I noticed them before they were able to pull me out of the car and do God knows what to me before stealing my car. For a couple of minutes, I was kind of shaken up, mainly because I thought they may have tried to follow me, but eventually I cooled down and I just learned from what happened. I also called my dad, and I asked him if he would buy me a handgun. I was debating whether or not to put this here because I usually don't ever post anything, but a friend of mine convinced me, as it perhaps could be helpful to others that were in similar situations. For some context, a few months ago, I had driven to a gas station on a highway near where I live because I had to deliver a package via a locker. The road is a smaller one, it's 2-way, and there's a gas station on each side. I parked at the one on the side of the road that I was driving on and then crossed on foot to get to the other where the locker was. The road was fairly empty as it was close to midday on a Saturday, if I recall correctly. However, the place the locker was located in had shut down permanently and I couldn't access it anymore. So I crossed again and started going back to my car. By the time I had done this, a truck belonging to a private postal company in my country had parked in the same gas station that I did. Again, it wasn't a weekday, so the place was closed, and there was no one else nearby. The driver got out of the truck and came towards me, and he proceeded to ask me if we could connect the battery in his truck to the one in my car, because his had just died. I refused immediately. 1, because I don't know the first thing about doing that, and 2, because the whole interaction just seemed off to me, and I generally felt uncomfortable giving a complete stranger access to my vehicle. I apologized and quickly got back to my car, which was luckily not very close to his. I didn't even put my key in my ignition and start my car before I noticed that him and his truck had already left and gotten back onto the highway. Now, I'm no car expert. I mean, I can look at a car's headlights and tell you which way they're going. Let me know if you know what that's a reference to. But that's about it. But I do know that even if your battery is dead or very close to dying, there's no way you would start your vehicle back up again after it being turned off, especially a big truck. It would take at least some time to charge up, and then maybe 4 or 5 tries to get it to turn on, if it did, which is unlikely in most cases. It didn't even register to me that he could have had bad intentions until after I was long out of there and heading home. I don't know if all of the TV I watch is getting to me or what, but everyone that I've told agrees with me that it was really weird, and I did good by not giving him the time of day. I do wonder if he could have just been in need of some genuine help, but to be frank, I have no idea. Anyway, please, if you're ever alone on the road, do not interact with strangers who stop by, and do not get out of your car unless absolutely necessary. Back in early 2022, just after New Year's, my family was visiting another family who were friends of ours. I had heard some bad things about the city they lived in, but I never thought much of stuff like that because I'd never experienced anything dangerous, and their street was safe. I get along well with the eldest son of the family. We've known each other since we were little, and we were having fun. I was a bit more degenerate and experimental back then, and young, so he talked me into sucking deodorant. It's stupid and dangerous, and the high lasts only a few seconds. For those unfamiliar, well, I'm gonna pause right there because this person goes into details on how you do this, and I don't think that's cool. So we are going to move on past the tutorial portion of this story. I still have the sensation burned into my memory, tasting soap and chemicals and stinging my tongue and lips a bit. We'd gone through a can or two and I wanted to try some more and get some snacks, but it was late, so we had to go to a petrol station. We went outside and we told our parents that we were going for a walk. I put on my new winter coat, which was fluffy and very reflective, and the outside was purely a bright reflective material. It's the exact opposite of camouflage. We got to the petrol station, and both of us noticed this weird red car outside of the gas station as we entered, but I didn't think much of it. I've always found it's best not to show any fear and act completely unbothered to keep weird people from noticing you. I don't know. It's a mental game for me. We went in, and they didn't have any deodorant, which we suspected before going, but it was our only option, and we thought it'd be fun to go for a walk anyways. My friend still wanted something to eat, so he got some warm food. But before that, he pointed out that the car we saw was now right outside of the entrance of the petrol station kiosk, and that there were multiple sketchy-looking dudes sitting in it. I started feeling anxious now and mentally started to prepare myself, but I kept my composure. They were there for way too long to be doing anything normal. They were waiting for us. We got ready to leave, and we only had one option: walk past them quickly. We didn't know if they would notice us looking at them, but they likely did. We exited, and my friend walked much faster than me and passed them, but as I passed them, they told me that there was a guy in the car who knew my friend, and he wanted to say hi. I played along and said, "Hey, he says he knows you." A part of me actually bought into it, to be honest. I don't know. Maybe the part of me that was trying to cope with the situation. But I find that playing along and acting normally when people try tricking you like this usually exposes their deception. For example, my friend reacted perfectly. He acknowledged what I said, turned around slightly while still walking, waved to the car while saying hi, and continued to walk, which made it hard for them to have any excuse to not let us keep walking. There's no need to get right close to them just to say hi. As soon as they realized we weren't going to walk up to the car, they started it up and left. They must have seen us coming because they drove out of the petrol station, turned left, and then drove down the road that we came from, and they were now blocking the entrance to our only path home. This put a chill down my spine, as it confirmed the only reason they were there was for us. But not only that, they weren't done. They lingered for a bit, but maybe they realized we wouldn't be stupid enough to walk into their trap, so they slowly drove a little bit further down the road. But we weren't stupid enough to fall for that trap either. I did slightly hope that they had given up and realized that their plan was stupid, because I thought that if I were a criminal, I wouldn't be doing the things that they were doing. But I didn't even really know what their intentions were. Were they going to rob us from their car? That seemed like a self-limiting method to me, but I didn't dare think that they'd kidnap us or anything like that, and I didn't see why they'd want to target us for both of those things. Murder for fun? I don't know. My friend told me that as soon as they were out of sight, we would run to the left along some of the buildings. It's his town, and he knows his way around. It's kind of hard to describe the layout, but the road that leads to the path that we came from swings to the left behind some buildings, and we were on the opposite side of those buildings, and we could use them as cover. At this point, I thought, crap. My coat is the most reflective piece of clothing in the world, and it's not exactly the best thing in this situation. So I took it off, and I tied the sleeves around my waist, with the inside facing out, which is black. Hopefully they wouldn't see me. But parts of the outside of the coat were still visible. The adrenaline kicked in, and we ran for a while along those houses. You could say that we did get a high, just not off of deodorant. It was absolutely nerve-wracking not knowing what they wanted or where they were. I imagined them just being around every corner. Eventually, we reached the end of the row of houses, which wasn't too far, but it felt like we were running for miles. There were 2 main roads that crossed here, and I felt fairly confident that the men didn't know where we were. I also started to wonder how many men were actually in that car. My friend pointed to a little path which ran along the right side of the road, which was to our right. I could taste safety again. The path was a lot lower than the road, and there was a slope connecting the side of the road to the side of the path with some bushes on it. It felt safe. At the end of the path, there was a tunnel, and that tunnel, although it was dirty and dark, seemed more appealing than it ever could otherwise. At that moment, that tunnel represented safety. We started walking and talking more casually, but we were still a little cautious. My friend told me that when we went through the tunnel, we'd come to his street, and then we'd just have to walk the distance back to his house. But as we were about halfway along the path, we saw headlights approaching on the road which was to the left of and above us. Out of reflex, I crouched down and I leaned into the steep slope, which had damp grass on it, and I hid behind the bush, and my friend did the same. I honestly thought this was just a random car and that we were being overly cautious, but boy, I'm glad we did, because the car drove suspiciously slowly, and it felt like ages before it finally passed us. In hindsight, what other car would even be out there at that time of night? It ended up turning left down the road that we came from. It was them, probably completing their circle and going back to the petrol station to find some new victims. Imagine what losers you have to be to spend your time waiting around outside for possible victims. Whether they saw us or not, I don't know, but they had no chance of getting to us. We started sprinting again now towards the tunnel. It was a short journey through the tunnel, but we were finally on my friend's street. What a relief. Then we slowed down again and we started walking. You'd think this was the end of it. And we did too. But as we'd gotten down a bit down the street, which went down a big hill that led out of the town, we heard a loud bang, like a gunshot. And we started sprinting once again after another adrenaline high. It wasn't right near us, but it sounded like it came from the petrol station that we had come from, or at least in that direction, which wasn't that far away. I think anything could have made us run at that point, though. Even the sound of a sweet old lady offering us cookies. That would have been a bit creepy in this context, too, though. We finally reach his house, we go up to his room, and we just agree not to tell anybody. We debated whether the bang that we heard was or was not a gunshot. It was New Year, so, it's not impossible that it was just one singular firework, I guess. I'd never heard a gunshot before, so I didn't have any reference, but I still remember thinking that it was a bit too loud to be a firework.